The door opened before Riva-san finished raising her hand to knock. She had been standing in the service corridor of Transit Station Varath 7 for 6 seconds, long enough to read the name plate beside the office, long enough to feel the wrong thing settling in her chest. The plate said Bureau Compliance Liaison, SCRATH Periphery Division. The name below it said Counselor THESSA ORIN. Riva knew that name. She had grown up saying it with something close to reverence. The woman in the doorway was older than Riva remembered, the silver at her temples whiter, the lines around her eyes deeper. She looked at Riva the way someone looks at a stranger they half recognize, a flicker of computation before the expression locked. "Riva," Orin said, "you look thin." That was all she said. No surprise, no relief, just a measurement. Riva stepped inside and put the document on the desk between them. 28 months earlier, she had been a junior transit analyst for the Terran Freight Council. Her corridor was Periphery Route 9, a 14-station arc through Sarath-controlled space, handling licensing renewals for 44 human freight operators who ran cargo between the outer colonial settlements and the neutral exchange hubs. It was not glamorous work. It was paperwork and compliance forms and the occasional discrepancy flag that needed a second signature. She had been 20 years old, and she had been good at it. The discrepancy she found on a Tuesday afternoon was not small. 44 freight operators, all licensed, all operating within treaty parameters, but 3 of the licensing renewals had been routed through a Sarath Bureau suboffice rather than the standard Terran-controlled review channel, and the suboffice's terms differed from the standard contract in one specific and buried clause. Under Sarath Compact Ordinance 14C, labor contracts originating from that suboffice could be reclassified as extended service agreements if the operator missed a single filing deadline. Miss one deadline and the operator did not lose their license. They lost their status. They became contracted labor. It had happened before. Not to humans, but the precedent was there. Riva had flagged it immediately, written a full report, and transmitted it to her supervisor with a request for an urgent review. The review never happened. What happened instead was that Riva arrived at work 3 days later to find 2 Sarath Bureau officials waiting in the corridor outside her office. They were polite. They showed her an authorization document with 11 signatures. They explained, in measured tones, that a compliance review had flagged her transit data access as potentially inconsistent with her clearance level. The review would take time. In the interim, she would need to relocate to a bureau monitoring facility while her credentials were verified. The monitoring facility was on a station she had never heard of. It had no public listing. The cell she was assigned had a cot, a meal port, and a single window that looked onto a sealed cargo bay. She was held there for 28 months. The release had come without warning or explanation. A guard she had never seen before opened the door at 600 and told her she was free to go. No paperwork, no apology. The Bureau's official position, she learned afterward, was that the review had concluded and no irregularities had been found. 44 operators. She had checked as soon as she had access to a terminal. 31 of them had missed at least one filing deadline during the 28 months she was held. 31 operators reclassified under Ordinance 14C, 31 human freight families transferred into contracted labor under Sarath Bureau management. She had not cried. She had opened a fresh document and started writing. The investigation took her 6 weeks. She was meticulous about it. She worked from public terminals at 3 different stations, never logging in from the same node twice, building the chain from the bottom up. The authorization document the Bureau officials had shown her, the one with 11 signatures, she had photographed with the lens built into her transit ID badge before they had taken the badge away. The image was blurred at the edges but clear enough to read 9 of the 11 names. 9 names she did not recognize. She spent the first 2 weeks finding the 10th. His name was Veth Sarath, a mid-level Bureau compliance director. She found him through a Sarath administrative registry cross-reference, his signature appearing on 6 other detention orders in the same 2-year window. 6 other humans, all of them analysts or operators or freight liaisons who had been filing compliance flags against Bureau sub-office contracts when they disappeared. All of them had been released in the past 8 months, quietly, without explanation. She contacted one of them, a freight liaison named Karen Holt, who had been held for 19 months on a different unlisted facility, released 3 weeks before Riva. Holt agreed to meet at a neutral exchange terminal on way station Orvath 2. She was 31 years old, and she had the kind of stillness that comes from long practice at being very careful about what she said aloud. Holt told her 2 things. The first was that the Bureau had offered her a settlement, a modest sum of station credits, and a formal acknowledgement that her review had found no irregularities, in exchange for a non-disclosure covenant covering the facility, the duration, and the names on any authorization documents. Holt had not signed it. The second was that she had heard, through a source she did not name, that at least 3 others from the original group had signed and taken the credits. Riva wrote both things down. The 11th name took 2 more weeks. It was buried in a routing amendment attached to the original monitoring facility transfer order, not a signature, but a contact authorization number, a number that traced back to a Terran Transit Council office. Specifically, to a senior counselor whose portfolio included periphery licensing oversight. Specifically, to Counselor Thessa Oren. Riva had stood at the terminal for a long time after reading that, long enough that the session timer expired and the screen went dark. Then she had opened a new session and kept working. She had known Oren since she was 15 years old. Oren had written the recommendation letter that got her the freight council position. Oren had told her, at a formal dinner in the council's reception hall when Riva was still a trainee, that a person who could read a discrepancy in a routine contract was worth more to the Terran freight network than 100 administrators who only understood the forms. Riva had kept that sentence. She had thought about it, in the cell with the sealed cargo bay view, when there was nothing else to think about. She kept working. You already knew, Riva said. She was not asking. Oren sat down. She did not flinch, did not look away from the document on the desk. She looked at it the way someone looks at a bill they have been expecting for a long time. I knew you would find it eventually, Oren said. You were always very thorough. You authorized the transfer order. I authorized a compliance review. The Bureau handled the rest. You knew what Ordinance 14C meant for those operators. Oren's hands were very still. The reclassifications were a Bureau outcome. I had no direct authority over. You had the contact authorization on the original order. Riva's voice did not rise. It did not need to. You signed the routing amendment. You knew what sub-office was processing those renewals. You knew what the deadline clause did. The silence in the office was particular, not the silence of denial, the silence of a person choosing which version of the truth to offer. The operators were running contested routes, Oren said finally. Routes the Sarath Bureau wanted brought under their licensing framework. If they had remained under Terran licensing, the Bureau would have canceled the corridor agreement entirely. All 44 operators would have lost access to 9 stations. The reclassification of 31, it was a negotiated outcome. Not a just one, but a calculated one. You traded 31 people's freedom to protect a trade corridor. I protected access to 9 stations for 13 years of treaty renewal. And you put me in a cell for 28 months to keep me from filing my flag. Oren looked at her for a long moment. I thought you would be released within 60 days. The Bureau assured me it would be a short review. Karen Holt was held for 19 months. Something shifted in Oren's expression, a small adjustment like a weight settling differently on a scale. She had not known about Holt, or perhaps she had known about Holt and not about the 19 months. Either way, the number landed. The Bureau offered her a settlement, Rivat said. Non-disclosure credits. She did not take it. Oren said nothing. 3 others did, Rivat continued. I don't know their names yet. I didn't need them. I had enough. That was the thing about finding the truth. It did not always require completeness. It required enough to make the chain visible, enough to show where the authorization had run, enough to put the question in a form that an oversight body could not set aside. She had been thorough, but she had not been greedy. She had built what she needed and stopped when it was built. I transmitted the full evidence package 30 minutes ago, Rivat said, to 6 bodies. The Terran Transit Authority Arbitration Office, the Bureau Oversight Commission, the Periphery Treaty Panel, the Freight Council Compliance Board, the Public Record Registry at Station Orvath Prime, and the Independent Neutral Zone Observer Office at Verath Central. Oren's expression did not change. The Freight Council Arbitration Office logged it first. The Bureau's Periphery Operating License carries a mandatory review trigger under Article 11 of the Corridor Agreement. 6 simultaneous filings to registered oversight bodies activate that trigger automatically. The review is already in process. Rivat. The 31 operators are named individually in the package. Every reclassification under Ordinance 14C is documented with the original Bureau sub-office routing, the filing deadline in question, and the gap between the standard Terran renewal timeline and the sub-office timeline they were given. The Compliance Director Veth Sareth is named. The routing amendment is appended. Your contact authorization number appears on page 4. She was quiet for a moment. There's also a complete account of my detention. Cell assignment, facility listing, duration, absence of any formal charges, the guard statement at release. The Bureau's position that no irregularities were found is included alongside the list of 31 reclassifications that occurred while I was held, and Karen Holt's account. She gave it voluntarily. Oren sat very still. I don't want you to explain it again, Rivat said. I understand the calculation. I understand that you believed it was the only available option and that you believed the cost would be smaller than it was. I'm not here to hear the calculation. She picked up the document from the desk. I came here because I wanted to see your face when you understood that the truth was already in motion. She was 3 corridors away when her transit ID registered a priority alert. She stopped and read it standing in the glass-walled connector passage between the station's administrative ring and its outer dock, the one that looked out over the approach lanes. The Terran Transit Authority had dispatched a corridor hold formation, 74 ships. The formation designation was Sarath Reach. It was already in transit toward the Bureau's Periphery Division hub, assigned to hold in place pending the outcome of the Article 11 license review. The Bureau's Periphery Operating License was suspended pending that review. 31 operators, each one named in the notification as a person whose reclassification was under formal challenge. Rivat looked through the glass at the approach lanes, empty now but not for long. She thought about the operators she had never met, the 31 people whose names she had written and rewritten in 6 weeks of careful reconstruction, the families they went home to, the roots that had been theirs. She thought about the 9 names she had not recognized on that authorization document and the one she had. She thought about Counselor Thessa Oren sitting in that office with very still hands, waiting for the next knock on the door she could not predict and could not prepare for. The thing about truth was that it did not care about the calculation. It did not weigh the trade corridor against the 31 people. It did not weigh the 28 months against the 9 stations. It simply existed, patient and complete, waiting for someone thorough enough to find it and stubborn enough not to stop. Rivat had been thorough. She had always been thorough. It was, apparently, a quality that outlasted a cell on a station with no public listing. She forwarded the notification to a clean address she had set up at the start of the 6 weeks, one that would deliver to the Freight Council's public access inbox, time-stamped and unalterable. Then she pocketed her transit ID and walked toward the outer dock, the approach lanes empty and bright on the other side of the glass. Behind her, 74 ships were moving through Sarath space. Ahead of her, 31 names were waiting to hear what the truth had cost and what it had recovered. She did not know yet which feeling was going to arrive first. She suspected it would be both at once. That was usually how it went when the thing you found was the thing you had been afraid to find, and you filed it anyway, and the ships moved anyway, and the world reset itself around a truth that had always been there. She kept walking. The glass passage ended at a wide docking hub, bright with overhead lights and the noise of freight handlers and the ordinary commerce of people who did not yet know that 74 Terran ships were 4 hours out and holding course. She bought a cup of coffee from a service cart near the docking registry desk and stood holding it with both hands, warming her palms, looking at the approach lane displays. The first formation icons appeared on the display board at 11:47. Small triangles in tight formation, route-locked designation codes she already knew. One by one, the docking supervisors looked up from their consoles and then looked at each other. A Sarath Bureau official in a gray administration coat came through the far door at a pace that was almost a run and stopped when he saw the display board. And his face did the particular thing that faces do when a calculation finishes, and the result is not the expected number. Rivad drank her coffee. She did not look at him. 31 names, 74 ships, one truth filed to 6 bodies at once, time-stamped and unalterable, belonging now to the public record where no routing amendment could reach it. That was enough. That had always been enough. She had just needed the 6 weeks to prove it.